A lot of people think being introverted means you're shy or means that you don't like people or you don't like to be with people, or my favorite one, and I'll say that in air quotes, that we can't be leaders because we're introverted. All of these things really have nothing to do with introversion in terms of can you or can't you, but what they do have to do with is how you lead, how you communicate, how you engage with the outside world.
Welcome to the podcast about communication in business. I'm your host, George Torok. I'm known as the speech coach for executives because I help business leaders deliver the intended message for greater success. And we do that through one-on-one coaching and group training for the team. My guest today is Stacey Chazin. Here's 3 facts that I think you should know about Stacey. 1, she holds a master's in organizational development and leadership, degrees in marketing and communication, and a certification in the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator Assessment. 2, Stacey is a proud introvert who grappled for decades with societal expectations that favored extroversion. Those extroverts. She then underwent a remarkable transformation with an aha moment that happened during a flash mob. Now that sounds interesting. Instead of conforming to societal pressures, she embraced her introverted qualities, turning them into powerful assets that allowed her to thrive both professionally and personally. She now coaches other introverts to do the same. And 3, Stacey founded iFactor Leadership, a coaching and learning program that guides introverts to tap into their innate strengths to become more impactful, influential, and recognized leaders. Stacey Chazin, welcome to Your Intended Message.
Thank you, George. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Delighted to be talking with you today about a topic that certainly is dear to me because I am an introvert. Some people are surprised to hear that. How can you be so outspoken but still be an introvert? And perhaps we might start by clarifying by what we mean by the differences between introverts and extroverts.
That's a great question, and also speaks to a lot of myths that are out there about what it means to be introverted. So when we talk about introversion and its polar opposite, extroversion, we use those terms in the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator framework, which you mentioned earlier. I have a certification in, or MBTI. And for those of your listeners not familiar with MBTI, it's the world's most commonly used personality assessment. And it essentially reveals for you or suggests to you what your preferences are along 4 different dimensions. How you give and receive energy from the world, how you take in information, how you make decisions, and how you interact with the outside world. So I'll focus on the introversion versus extroversion. So when we talk about, we say you have a preference for one or the other, when you have a preference for introversion, it means that you are fueled by having time alone, being with a small group or just one other person, having an opportunity to go deep in your thoughts rather than skim the surface on a lot of different topics. Whereas people who have a preference for extroversion tend to be fueled by the outside world. They get their energy when they're with a large group of people, when they get to talk about a whole bunch of different things that, sequentially or at once, when they like to talk out loud, to think out loud, and they're processing and engaging with the world more externally than those of us who have a preference for introversion. And so if I may, by sharing that with you, I hope to dispel a couple myths. So a lot of people think that when being introverted means you're shy or means that you don't like people or you don't like to be with people, or my favorite one, and I'll say that in air quotes, that we can't be leaders because we're introverted. Like all of these things really have nothing to do with introversion in terms of can you or can't you, but what they do have to do with is how you lead, how you communicate, how you engage with the outside world.
And let's clarify shyness, because it's introverts can be shy, but the two are not necessarily linked.
Correct.
And so what I've learned is that shyness is a learned behavior. It's a response that we've learned when we were probably a child, and it depends on our environment, our family environment, our community environment, how we were treated as kids. And I kind of remember the expressions, children were meant to be seen and not heard.
Yeah, so a lot of things going on there. So one, you can certainly be shy and extroverted. So it could be that it just takes you a little more time to warm up to people, but once you do get into that big group, you're getting your energy from that. You're getting your energy from lots of information, lots of people, lots of engagement. So definitely separate things. And it's so true when you say we hear messages as a kid, right? I think that, like, when I think about my story, I started hearing this message that being introverted was less than, so to speak. Like, when we hear that when we're in preschool, right? The teacher will say, or tell your parents, she needs to be in circle time with the other kids. She needs to play with more kids on the playground. I don't know why she wants to play with blocks by herself. Now, for me, this was the early 70s when I was in preschool, or the mid 70s. Hopefully it's changed a bit, but we certainly hear these messages from when we're very young and all through school, right? It's better to have plans on a Saturday night, to have more friends, to be more popular, all these things in high school, whereas it's perceived as less than if you're happier being at home with a book or a movie or just one friend. And then that carries over into adulthood. We hear the same messages at work. And that's an interesting one. Children should be seen and not heard. Not sure how that connects, but it's certainly, for those of us who are introverted, maybe that gives us a little comfort, that it reinforces that we prefer to stay quiet sometimes.
And the introvert in the workplace, in the meeting. Now, we're not getting report cards that we have to take home to our parents now and say, well, Stacey doesn't speak up in meetings. I don't think she's really participating. How do we get past that?
Yeah, we don't get a report card home to our parents, but what we do get is we get raises and promotions and recognition and positive feedback. And when we can't speak up effectively in and around a meeting, and I'll share what I mean about that in a second, it really can harm our leadership trajectory, because we spend so much time in meetings, whether they're in person or virtually, and they are a prime forum for opportunities to share our thought leadership, to demonstrate our insights, our expertise, to show how we can be leaders. And when we don't do that in ways that are extrovert aligned, right? And I say that because most workplaces are designed with extroverts in mind. The way that the physical space is set up, the expectations for collaboration, for having ideas in the moment, not having that opportunity to think through our ideas before we share them, very much extrovert aligned, just like meetings. So the expectation and the bias is, if you're not coming up with these brilliant ideas in the meetings, if you're not collaborating with others in meetings, well, you must not be as smart as the folks who are, those extroverts who like to think out loud. And so that hurts us. And one of the things I talk to my introverted clients about is, how can you have your voice heard more in a meeting and your ideas heard? And that starts, the answer is, it's not just about the meeting, it's before, during, and after the meeting. And I'll share what I mean by that. One is, you want to get a meeting agenda ahead of time. Request from whoever is coordinating the meeting, whoever the facilitator is, can I have the meeting in advance? And that's really a best practice for any meeting, and regardless of whether you're introverted or extroverted, so people know what the desired outcomes are, what the expectations are. But for introverts especially, we tend to excel in planning. So when we can see an agenda in advance and we can prepare talking points or ideas for the various items ahead of time, and we have an opportunity to get data, which we also tend to be very good at data analytics, or looking for narrative examples to build our case, having that ahead of time is great. We can also set up or request individual meetings with people who are leading different subjects ahead of time to kind of, I'm going to say, plant our ideas, but give them a preview of the ideas that we're going to share at that meeting. So it makes them more receptive to it. It might even lead them to call on us during a meeting, which can be helpful, that we're not trying to break into the conversation. Then when you're at the meeting, you want to come prepared with your talking points for any of the topics that are relevant to you that you want to weigh in on. Have your data, have your bullets, so it's not spontaneous for you as an introvert. That's really important. You also want to, another thing you can do is decide ahead of time, what are 3 points I want to make at this meeting, or 2 points I want to make at this meeting, and check them off as you get through them so that you're holding yourself accountable for those contributions. The next thing is, if you're asked on the spot for an idea, ask if you could have a little time to think about it. And you could use language like, I'd love to give that some thought, take a look at some data and sit with it for a minute. My best thinking is going to come that way. So that's a way to let you circle back to people afterward. And then after the fact, see if you can sit down with someone either one-on-one or send an email so that you're putting your thoughts in writing. We tend to be very good writers, and writing also gives you an opportunity to sit with the idea, to digest what you want to say, so you're not sharing it just on the spot. What I'll say is, what all these things have in common is it lets you tap into your strengths as an introvert, right? Preparing, data analysis, writing, thoughtfulness, all these things. You want to try to change the expectations and the environment so that you have an opportunity to tap into your strengths when you're contributing in any way, including at meetings.
So what I'm hearing there is that we need to buy ourselves some time so that we can process in the manner that we prefer to do. And it's interesting. I noticed with one group of colleagues that we met on a monthly basis to discuss. We came from different businesses, so it was kind of a mastermind type group. And I noticed that the group leader recognized at some point that I'm an introvert, and so he would never ask me to be the first speaker because partly because I told him, I said, I don't want to speak first. I want to think about the topic. I want to hear what other people are saying first, and I want to think about where the gaps are. I don't, because whoever speaks first is actually just going to say what's obvious. So I had people say to me after the meetings, they say, George, I always appreciate waiting for you to speak because I know you'll have something that no one else has thought about yet. And I thought, oh, okay, so there is value, but I had to establish that credibility over time.
Yeah. And I think that because you speak, either you wait to speak or you take up less airtime, you share fewer ideas, people listen more. They tend to say, oh, now what he's going to say, this is really going to matter. And George, I'll give you for listeners of your intended message, I can share with you a link to put in the show notes. I have a meeting playbook for introverts, 10 ways to have your voice heard and your idea shine. They can go to ifactorgift.com, or I'll give you a link to post in the notes. But it's all these strategies of really, and this is what powerful introverted leadership is all about, right? It's figuring out what are your innate introverted strengths and then using those in the workplace so you can do your job better, you can get recognized for your strengths and contributions, and then ultimately get the leadership that's due to you.
So that meeting playbook, you can find that link in the description below. Stacey, that will give people ideas and tips on to do what?
Some more detail on some of the things I just shared. So how can you have your voice heard? How can you prepare ahead of time? What can you do when you're at the meeting? And then how can you use that post-meeting time frame to either reinforce, follow up, share more information so that people are benefiting from your expertise. They're hearing your ideas, your creativity, your innovation, whatever it is, so that you're not overshadowed by the extroverts in the room.
Introverts as leaders, what can they do to shine in that role? Because do we tend to see leaders as someone who's always speaking up and making noise? Oh, they have leadership potential. Look at that. They're speaking up. They're taking charge. And then the introverts might not be seen as leadership potential. What can they do to ensure that they get those opportunities and that when they do lead, they lead well?
Yeah, you're spot on with that observation. So yes, extroverted personalities and behaviors are completely aligned with how most of us think about leadership, which leaves a lot of introverts in the dust, right? You feel like two things happen. One, you're at a strategic disadvantage because people aren't seeing you through a leadership lens. So it's much harder to get promoted, get a raise, to get any kind of leadership role. And two, what it leads a lot of us to do, myself included, is we feel like we have to pretend to be extroverted. We have to be more social. We have to be more collaborative. All these things that are not aligned with how we work best. We pretend. And what happens when you pretend to do anything really is you're destined to fail. Maybe in one situation here and there, it might work out for you, but over the long run, pretending to be something you're not, including extroverted, is not going to work out well for you because that's not who you are authentically. So the idea is to identify and tap into what are your strengths as an introvert that align with leadership. And I'll share some typical ones, and this is going to differ for the individual introvert, but introverts tend to have a number of traits aligned with leadership. One, we tend to be really good at deep listening. We can focus. We don't feel the need to fill the silence gap. We really listen more so than thinking about how we're going to respond to what the person's saying. We're really tuned into their emotions, their priorities, their needs. Related to that, we tend to be highly empathetic and have a high level of emotional intelligence. Super important as a leader, because you want to understand what does each of your team members, what do they need to thrive? What are their priorities? How can you get the most out of them so that they're not just benefiting your team or organization, but they're feeling fulfillment from the role they're playing, from the contributions they're making. So that's huge. We also tend to have a calm demeanor. And this is extremely important when you have contentious conversations or you're in a period of conflict as an organization or as a team. And to your point earlier about meetings, we tend to sit back, we take it all in, we're not getting caught up in the heat of the moment, and then we're speaking at a point where we've given something due thought, and we have a gift for kind of calming the seas and letting people say, okay, if George Torak said this or Stacey Chazin said this, it must come from a place of deep thoughtfulness. And I should really be listening to that. So that's another piece. And then a final piece I'll mention is, and I referred to this earlier, is we tend to excel in written communication. And that's very important as a leader, to be able to write an inspirational email, produce a report, or send an email to an individual person or a group that's really going to tap into the motivations that they're going to have to perform well, to see that you're someone who cares about them, to understand your role in the broader organization's mission and understand how you're contributing. All of these things are critical leadership competencies that many introverts tend to have.
And I believe I heard you say that introverts tend to have more empathy.
Yes.
So does that suggest that introverts spend more time thinking about the people around them?
We tend to spend more time thinking. So I think that includes the people around us. We also tend to be voracious readers, more so than extroverts. And I think that thoughtful practice of reading, many of us were avid readers from the time we started to read. I think it gives you insights into human dynamics, and you're able to, I think, connect with where other people are coming from. And I think that's both fueled by and is something we can use in our one-on-one interactions with people. So if you want to get to know your team members, having 10, 15 people around a conference room table isn't the way you're going to do it as an introvert. But having one-on-one lunches or coffee chats or Zoom conversations, whatever it is, you get to tune into the other person's, not just their verbal, what they're saying to you, but their body language. We're very good at reading between the lines, so to speak. So yeah.
And what can leaders do to make the environment more comfortable for the introverts in their group?
Wonderful question. So one thing I recommend the first time a group comes together, whether it's for a new project or a new team is forming, you're around the table or you're on a Zoom screen. And as the leader, I suggest asking everyone to go around the table or the screen and say, what do you want the rest of the group to know about what you need to be at your best, to contribute ideally to the group's goals or what you need to thrive. And that's an opportunity for introverts and extroverts, wherever you fall. But if you're an introvert, you could share things like, I tend to do my best work when I have an opportunity to balance collaboration with solo work time. Or I can give you my best ideas when I can contribute those in writing. So listen to what goes around the table, and that should not just help the leader, but it should help the teammates as well. So you know how you can best support your colleagues in whatever your joint venture is. And as a leader, even if you're not doing that, you want to allow for different styles of participation, different work styles. So collaboration is wonderful, but you want to make sure that your team or organization has an opportunity to balance that with their singular work time so that they can go deep if they need to. And conversely, you want to make sure that your extroverted employees have opportunities to think out loud, to engage more with others. Maybe there are optional brown bag lunches where you can invite people in your organization to come and say, hey, if you want to bounce ideas off the group, we're going to be on Zoom every Tuesday at 12. Something like that. So people have, it's not mandatory. So many introverts probably will skip those invitations, but you want to give people opportunities to contribute in ways that are going to be best aligned with their innate strengths. So they're going to perform at their best.
And while you're saying that, I remember when I was managing a group, and one of the individuals, he was eager, he was a good worker. However, when we were in meetings, he would often repeat out loud what other people had said. And I initially thought that this was rude on his part, but then I came to learn that he was clearly an extrovert, and that's how he did his self-thinking, his talk. He needed to hear it outside him, and I guess he was probably more stimulated by hearing it again than simply staying quiet. And it took me a while to figure that out. So people who are different than us will react in different ways, and we can't assume that they're rude or they're making fun of us.
That's so interesting. I'd never thought about that. Yeah, I've always found that rude too, that I felt it a little self-aggrandizing. But that's really interesting that's their learning or energy fueling process that they've discovered works for them. Right. So it's all about, you never know what people have going on in their minds, how they're wired, what their day's been like, to give people the benefit of the doubt. Right. It's not coming from a place of ego, but a place of this is what fuels me. Love that.
And I believe as a speech coach and as a presenter, and of course I'm biased, but I tend to believe that introverts make better presenters. And I believe that because I think they pay more attention to the audience. And they are better prepared. Whereas extroverts think, oh, I can just get up there, I'll wing it, and as long as I'm making noise and I'm feeling good, that's all that matters.
Yes, I totally agree. And that's another myth, a big myth about introverts, that we're not good presenters or we don't like to present. And we actually tend to be great presenters for the reasons you mentioned. And I'll mention two other reasons. One, well, I'll give you three reasons. One, and that's our penchant for data, right? So when we have the opportunity to prepare our presentations, we have an opportunity to collect the data. We're not doing it on the fly, and we're able to build our case through data in our slides or in our discussion. Two, we tend to be really good storytellers because we're such avid readers. So the narratives that we've been digesting since we were children, that's taught us how do we tell a story in a way that's impactful. And then the third reason, and this is actually probably my favorite, is that when you're up on the stage, when you're behind that podium, you don't have to make small talk. You're up there, everyone's in the audience. You might have to answer some questions at the mic afterward, but you have that boundary from your audience that protects your, I'm here and I'm going to share my expertise and my stories and my data, all these things with you, but I'm not going to have to think on the fly and make chit chat with you because I'm your presenter today.
Very true. And I certainly can see in my case, the reading of books. I've been reading since elementary school, and it's one of the things that gives me great pleasure. And I have a large, I'm looking over here at one of my bookshelves that's just full of books, and I've got a pile out in my reading chair as well, which I'm delighted to just sit and read and think. I wonder if introversion also shows up in the pursuits, our recreational choices. For example, I'm a runner. And I run alone, and I spend a lot of time talking to myself while I'm running alone. And I'm a skier, and I go skiing with a buddy, and we talk while we're on the chair. But when you're coming down the hill, you're totally alone. You're in the moment. You're in.
I think that's a great point. We are drawn toward activities that fuel our energy. So I love to crochet. That's a solo activity. I love to do crossword puzzles, like lots of introverts. I really enjoy yoga. Now, yoga, and I much prefer to do it in a studio versus at home online. However, when you don't talk to other people during the 1 hour or however long the class is, you're doing your own mind-body practice. But it's that I get the fuel from the community who's there with me, but I'm not engaging with them. It's not a team sport.
And Stacey, I want to hear more about your own remarkable transformation that came about being part of a flash mob. Now, I don't see being part of a flash mob as something an introvert would say, "Oh, I want to do that." What happened there?
Yeah. So that's the point. Yeah. So I was at a conference. It was in 2016. I was at a big conference, about maybe 500 people. And I knew many of the people there. And one of the conference organizers who I worked with periodically came up to me and said, when we get back from lunch, a bunch of us are going to go up on stage and start dancing spontaneously. We're going to start a flash mob as a way to get people energized for the afternoon sessions. Would you be willing to join us and be like one of the first people on stage? Now, I was still in my early stages of really embracing my introversion and recognizing what a gift it is, and that it has, along with it, so many gifts and strengths. And I wanted to fit in. I wanted to show that I was a team player. I thought it would show that I was a leader, all these things I told myself. So I said, okay, sure, despite the alarms going off in my head. So I did it. I felt like all 500 sets of eyes were on me. Of course, they weren't. There were plenty of other people on the stage. And when it was over, I had to hide out in the ladies' room for about an hour because I was so mentally and emotionally depleted from the whole thing. And I looked at myself in the mirror and I said, "What are you doing? Why did you do that?" I missed out on an hour of the conference because I was hiding out. I was so uncomfortable when I was up there. Really, no good came of it. There were plenty of other people who could have played the role. And it was this aha moment for me when I realized I need to stop pretending to be something I'm not, because that just was not me. And I easily could have said, "Oh, that's just not my jam," or, "I'm not comfortable with that. Let me know if there's some other way I could help." There's so many ways I could have gracefully declined the ask. I was not pivotal to that activity. And it was a moment for me where I really started to go deep in understanding what makes me the introvert, the human that I am, and my introversion is a significant part of that. And it actually launched me. I was working for a healthcare nonprofit, a health policy nonprofit at the time. Part of what I did was designing leadership programs for people who played roles in state health agencies, like the state Medicaid agency or the Department of Health. And we were working with a leadership coach at the time who used the Myers-Briggs assessment to help folks learn more about themselves. And I got bit by the leadership bug. And this is when I decided to go back to school and get a master's in organizational development and leadership. And when I finished the program and I was reflecting on it, I realized that a theme that ran through the program was the notion of leadership from a place of self-awareness. And that speaks to your introversion or extroversion, as well as many other things, right? What do you need to succeed as a leader? Recognizing that as a leader, you don't need to have every leadership competency, but recognizing which ones you have, and then surrounding yourself with people who can fill in the gaps. And that's what led me to launch my business, iFactor Leadership, to become a coach for introverted professionals. And it's what gets me out of bed in the morning, helping people, helping introverts realize there's nothing wrong with you. You're actually pretty darn great. And how can you recognize the specific ways that you're great and then use those to show up better at work so that you can get recognized for your leadership and move confidently throughout your career. So that's my story, starting with the flash mob.
And yes, I can see myself saying, me, flash mob? I don't think so.
Well, you're wiser than I was back then.
maybe just more of a wimp. And Stacey, another resource that you offer for introverts is the daily productivity hacks for introverts, which they can also find at your website, and we have that link in the description below. Stacey, as we prepare to wrap up, if you could sit down with a individual who's on the leadership track, but they seem to be limiting themselves because of their introversion, or others around them are saying, well, he doesn't speak up much. He never says anything, and we don't know what he's doing. He's just always kind of quiet. If you could give them 1, 2, or 3 pieces of advice to take more control of their career development and leverage their introversion to demonstrate their strengths.
Focusing on that, I would say you want to get to know yourself. You want to understand, with my coaching clients, I help them discover what's called their positive core. And the positive core, it's a term from the coaching framework I use is called appreciative coaching, which is essentially guiding individuals, and in this case, introverts, to focus entirely on the positive and figure out how to recognize and leverage the best of who they are in their career. So, and that starts with identifying your positive core. Those are all the gifts and strengths and traits that you have that show up when you're doing your best work, when you're feeling happiest and you're most fulfilled, you feel like you're making the biggest difference. So, you can do an exercise to begin identifying your positive core. And that's essentially, you can look back and you identify some peak experiences that you've had in your life, ideally mostly in the professional realm. And these are times when, again, you feel like you're contributing most, you're happiest, feel like you're making the biggest impact. And then look across those experiences and figure out what are some commonalities in the way you showed up, in the type of work you did, in the perspectives that you brought. And that's going to begin to help you identify your positive core. And then what I coach folks to do and talk about doing is they can identify, I call them introvert-powered leadership opportunities. So what are some opportunities in your workplace or even beyond, if you're looking to make a change, that are going to give you the chance to apply your positive core? So you're not trying to fit into a mold that isn't aligned with who you are, but think about where are some opportunities. And so, for example, if one element of your positive core is that you're a strong writer, look for opportunities. Could you start a blog? Could you contribute to a newsletter at work? Could you write a weekly email to your team about with thoughts on what your accomplishments have been, or as a group, and where you might go from here? So that's what I highly recommend doing. If you have an opportunity to do a Myers-Briggs assessment, if you haven't done, they're fabulous. The first time I did one, I read my report and it was like a window to my soul. Because it's not just about your introversion, it's 4 different dimensions. And it's not just those 4 dimensions separately, but the intersection of the 4 that really speaks to what your preferences are. I offer that if folks want to get in touch with me at iFactor Leadership, I have a small package where they can do the MBTI assessment, and we meet for 90 minutes to talk about what it means for how you can communicate more powerfully, manage conflict, work with others, all the big things that we want to really master to be on our leadership path.
My guest today is Stacey Chazin, reminding you that once you better understand yourself, then you can leverage your strengths and become the leader that you might be. If you like what you heard, tell your friends and post your 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, because that helps more listeners find us. Come back every week for more practical insights to help you deliver your intended message. I'm your host, George Torok.